Okay, so I want to spend basically the rest of the time we have here discussing the real underlying issue to all this, which is very much related to everything I do on this show about free speech and the role of government and all this stuff. So you mentioned Al Gore before, and one of my things with Al Gore is that I saw the movie An Inconvenient Truth. I really liked it at that. When did that come out? About
2006.
2006. Okay, really, really liked it at the time. I thought it woke up some things in me that maybe I hadn't thought of before. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, Al Gore decided to sell current TV to the government of Qatar so they could put Al Jazeera on here. The government of Qatar does tons of stuff with fossil fuels. So, and he basically created the producers. He created a failed network and profited on it for $500 million. I mean, he did the producers. He leveraged.
Are you the first one to point this out?
I've been saying it for a while. I don't know that anyone, but he's basically Max Bialystock. Like he created a failed network, and then ultimately he walked away with a ton of money. And the reason he was able to create the network was because he was the vice president, had all the connections in telecoms and all that stuff. It's not easy to get on cable channels and all that. But basically created a shitty product that he walked away with a ton of money, and at the same time, he took a massive check from the government of Qatar, who does a ton, obviously, with fossil fuels that he's always railing against. So I'm putting that out there that I suspect something's not quite right with what this guy is doing in the scheme of this thing. But can you lay out a perhaps more enlightened case than that he's just doing the producers? Because I sense that you don't really like him.
A case about what?
Well, so basically the federal government right now, it sounds like, is starting to attack think tanks, right? That they're attacking think tanks that do the very work that you do. Now, I would argue that because I believe in free speech, that a think tank should be allowed to think, and I don't like governmental control over thought, even if I completely disagreed with whatever the premise of the think tank was doing. But this is happening right now. So first off, I guess, is that directly related to Al Gore somehow? Because he's not part of the government anymore.
Right, but he is a figurehead. I mean, I don't even know what the legality of this is, but when they announced this, so I guess we should give people a little bit more context. Okay, so what's happened is over the years, what I call the climate catastrophe, and I just want to quickly, we haven't talked much about the climate issue specifically, just in terms of my view and other people's view, there's not this idea of climate believers and climate deniers. It's a really dumb kind of alternative. But there are different assessments of the magnitude of the warming influence of CO2. So we put X amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So let's say 130 parts per million, or 0.013% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the question is, how much does that affect climate in terms of primarily warming, and then anything that comes from warming? And then how much can it be anticipated to affect in the future as we put another 0.01%, another 0.01%, another 0.01%. And so basically, and we could go into the details, but we don't have time, some people think that that's a very mild and manageable warming, and they point to things like the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in terms of the geology of the globe is at almost record lows. Temperatures are at almost record lows. So in terms of the history of the planet, when we had 20 times more CO2, it was a very fertile time. CO2 is plant food. So what they argue is that CO2, and I argue, has a warming effect, but it's what's called the decelerating or logarithmic effect. Now that's actually not controversial, but then the other side says, well, even though it's a decelerating effect in the lab, in the atmosphere, there are these other dynamics that make it into this accelerating or very dramatic thing, and that's why we can expect runaway warming.
Wait, pause there real quick. So the decelerating meaning that at some point, even though you're putting this stuff out, it eventually starts sort of, regulating itself. Right.
No, it's just like a function like diminishing returns. I mean, you think about like when you press the pedal on your gas, right? So you, at a certain point, every little push, it goes faster to like 55, and after that goes slower, right? Otherwise, you just take off like a rocket and could go forever. So it's the same kind of thing. Every molecule of CO2 warms less than less. So this is an uncontroversial scientific fact, which, by the way, is part of why you need to learn a little bit about the science. You just have to ask people. The key thing is what's demonstrated and what's speculated. So this phenomenon of CO2 is demonstrated, but again, there's this other set of theories which I think are very speculative, certainly not proven, but have to do with catastrophic warming. But other people are allowed to have those theories. I don't want to suppress the theories. I think upon examination, they're very dubious. And whatever they are, you have to look at them in the context of the benefits of fossil fuels. So you always have to look at the big picture no matter what. But basically what I call so I'm calling them the catastrophists. So it's not, that's why I call them the catastrophists. So it's not a non-believer. I just believe in mild.
Okay.
So that's just the distinction. So basically what the catastrophists have had is what they consider failure. Now, I consider them enormously successful on their own terms because I think they've indoctrinated the whole world and passed a lot of bad policies. But on their terms, they have not shut down the fossil fuel industry. I mean, they want to shut down 80% of it in the next 30 years, the next 35 years. They're not accomplishing that. They tried to pass cap and trade. So what they've done over the past several years, their basic premise is, well, the reason we haven't done this is people are idiots, and there must be some villain who's causing this. So, of course, who's the villain? Big oil, who's allegedly forcing us to buy oil when, in fact, we basically asked them to produce the oil, right? So, but so what they did, they have this thing called the divestment movement, which is basically sell all of your oil stock, and that'll demonize them, and everyone will hate them, and then they'll vote against them. So that hasn't worked so well so far. So now what they have is the government actually prosecuting, I would argue, persecuting the companies. So different attorneys general. So, each state has an attorney general. And what they're doing, they're going after the biggest and allegedly baddest, ExxonMobil. And the attorney generals are saying, basically, Exxon, you over the years have not expressed what we believe are the proper climate catastrophist views. And in fact, you have funded people who don't have those views. So if you just said that, you'd think, oh, well, you're allowed to do that, right? This is America, you're free. But what they've done is they've called it fraud, right? They said you've defrauded, but for many reasons, it's not fraud. And the basic thing is for it to be fraud, you have to misrepresent specific facts. Fraud is not expressing a wrong opinion or even a wrong opinion that serves you. Companies do that all the time. It's misrepresenting specific facts that you have specific access to.
Right.
Now, the oil companies,
it's intention, really.
Well, but it's a specific thing. Like you have to misrepresent. So let's say Exxon's selling a certain kind of gasoline, and they misrepresent the contents of that. That's fraud. But they didn't misrepresent the fact that gasoline emits CO2 when you burn it. Everybody knows that.
Right.
And the experts on that were mostly government scientists. So Exxon didn't have an ability to defraud anyone. It had an ability to express opinions and to fund people or be affiliated with people who express different opinions. So what happened then is the government subpoenaed Exxon, different people subpoenaed Exxon, but they also started going after think tanks that they suspected might be connected with Exxon. And several Wednesdays ago, they came after me, or at least I was named in a subpoena, which means the government has any right it wants to records of any emails between anyone at my company and anyone at Exxon. So that, in my view, is a complete violation of my rights. And in my case, it's interesting because I don't run a nonprofit. I don't run a company that accepts donations. I run a for-profit company. I sell books, I sell lectures, right? So there's no plausibility that Exxon is sort of paying me to do something, and they went after me. So why did they go after me? Because I have a prominent book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. So what they're saying to me is, Alex, because you expressed an opinion we disagree with, we are going to invade your life.
Right.
And people are afraid of that.
So how are they actually coming at, like, what are they trying to do to you as a for-profit business? Well, so I get what they can try to do with Exxon, right? They can ultimately legislate things that would allow Exxon to not do business the way it seems
No, they're not legislating, they're prosecuting.
Or
they
prosecuting.
can throw people in jail.
Right, okay, so I understand that. But what can they do to you as a, well, I guess it's the same.
With the Competitive Enterprise Institute, at least for a while, they were going after that organization. So they're going after that organization as a party to it. Because if Exxon is committing fraud, then the people who help it can be considered a party to that fraud. But you see that the core issue, I just think my case brings out that the core issue is expressing an opinion that the government disagrees with. So, it just goes against just, a fundamental principle of progress is free speech, because we can't make progress without having the freedom to discuss ideas and debate ideas and have intellectual clarity. And so for this to happen is really horrible. And I think I'm in a position where, because I was only named on the subpoena, I wasn't subpoenaed. Now I could be in the future, but right now I have a lot of latitude to speak out. I have 100% ownership of my company. I don't have shareholders. I don't have donors. So I'm not accountable to anybody. So I have an ability to be very vocal about this issue now, and I'm taking advantage of it, hopefully to preempt them from doing something more in the future. I saw they did some attack recently, and I wasn't named in it. I don't know if that was a coincidence or not.
Right.
But I just want to make clear, I defend Exxon's right to express its opinion. I actually think it's given way more money to climate catastrophists than it has to, I would say, climate thinkers, which I would call myself. I think in general, they've been way too sympathetic. They just came out in favor of a tax on CO2. They've been promoting that. So I think their policies are wrong, in the wrong direction. But they can say anything they want. And certainly those...
Do you think they've given too much away out of guilt, sort of, or whatever, what you would say the anti-humanists have sort of guilted them into doing more than you would argue they should have done, because obviously
they should have done none.
Right.
I mean, they should have done none, but particularly given the balance of funding already. I mean, you're talking orders of magnitude different amounts of funding for the catastrophists versus any kind of advocate of fossil fuels. But they gave $100 million to Stanford's climate program. $100 million for every calculation I've seen. That's way more than they've given to anyone else. So this, these think tanks, these nonprofits, I mean, I really admire a lot of them. I met a lot of the people. I think they're really sincere, and they have a hell of a time getting funding from any of these companies. I think the company should give them, I don't need money, I have a different kind of business, but I think they should be giving a lot more money to fund opposition research, and that's a fundamental thing in a free society. And one key function of industry is if the industry is being attacked, it should fund opposition research.
Right.
I mean, it's even like, if you even take the tobacco industry should fund research. What it shouldn't do is misrepresent and lie about the research or fund fraud. But, if let's say somebody was exaggerating, I don't know anything about tobacco really, I never smoked, but let's say somebody was exaggerating by a factor of 4 the damages of tobacco, and you wanted to do research, that would be legitimate. So my point is, in a free society, you should be able to talk about anything you want. This isn't a marginal case. This is a completely normal thing for people to be able to talk about, and it's really scary that people think this is okay. This is on the Democratic proposed platform. All Hillary Clinton has to do is sign, and this is part of their platform. And what kind of stupid platform is it to tell the executive branch to go out? The platform's supposed to be legislative, so it's just bizarre. But they're telling the executive branch to go after specific companies. That's their platform.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic. What's going on with politics?
Well,
but
it's the regressives.
It's the regressives. Wow, I almost got through a show without saying regressives. There you go. But I guess what's happening here is that there's sort of a bigger cultural thing here. So we're talking about this through the lens of fossil fuels and all that stuff. But there's just a sort of bigger thing, which is what I've really made this show about, which is just about free speech. And that's why I keep talking about it so much, because I think people don't realize, again, regardless of what you think about climate change and fossil fuels and everything else that you've said here, that the real linchpin here is the free speech stuff. And I keep saying that I don't fear the government coming lately. I fear that we're taking away from ourselves. But you're laying out a pretty good case on the government side, so that's even more alarming.
They're related. I mean, I imagine you're talking about like these, what are they, comfort zones?
The safe spaces and the trigger warnings and self-censorship that we're doing relentlessly.
I mean, I graduated Duke in 2002.
Yeah.
And it was bad then, but it wasn't. I mean, I actually almost got kicked out of Duke for yelling at a guest environmentalist speaker. But in general, there weren't even those terms. So this idea of thought control, I think there's a relationship, even sort of private thought control that's not directly coercive, but where you basically make everybody afraid to say anything about any controversial topic. My guess is that makes people very comfortable with government thought control.
That's interesting. That's interesting. All right, so we got to wrap up, but what would be, give me your 1 minute sort of, if you wanted people that have heard this and that have said, all right, I never bought into any of this stuff, but I like some of this, what this guy has said. What's the 1 minute push that you can give them to explore this a little bit more beyond buy my book, which I'm going to talk about when I say goodbye?
Yes, it's an issue I usually bring up more. So I'll say this. Whenever we look at any issue in life, we're implicitly or explicitly saying this is good because I define good this way. We always have an implicit definition of good, whether we're talking about climate or fossil fuels or free speech or whatever. And so what I call my standard of value is always, I want to maximize human flourishing. And I think in our culture today, the standard of value we're taught, particularly with environmental issues, is we want to minimize human impact on the planet. So I want people to think whenever they run into these issues, ask themselves, is this thinker on the premise of maximum human flourishing, or are they on the premise of minimum human impact? And I think when you look at things, whether it's organic food or GMO or climate, you'll see a lot of that minimum impact as the ideal. And I think that completely contradicts maximizing human well-being. So if you want to maximize flourishing, you want to minimize negative impacts, but you want to maximize positive impacts. I think that's a great filter to look at life through.
Yeah, that's a perfect closing. But I should mention that you said to me right before we started that one of my former guests, Michael Mann, who's a climate scientist, I think at Penn State, am I right?
Yeah.
That he's blocked you on Twitter, which I guess goes to a little bit of just how contentious this whole thing is, because
Elon Musk too.
Elon Musk has blocked you too?
I mean, but yeah, what was interesting about Michael Mann, I'd say when watch Michael Mann speak, I encourage anyone to watch any of his lectures. I haven't seen your interview, but I've seen his lectures. Look at the precision or non-precision about the issue of what is demonstrated versus what is speculated, because what they tend to do is they'll say something trivial like CO2 warms, which everyone agrees with, and then they'll jump into, therefore it's catastrophic. So just look at, is Michael Mann really respecting your mind? Is he really explaining things with the degree of precision that would be necessary for you to really understand the topic? I'm not asking you to take a position. I'm just saying people should think about that. And one indication is how they deal with debate. Now, I don't block people. Other people, they can have their policy. But Michael Mann wrote a post that said, Alex Epstein is the Koch brothers' attack dog, which wouldn't be a negative thing in my view, but it was bizarre. I mean, it's not true. I mean, nobody's funding me at all. He just made it up. He just completely made it up. The idea was, he didn't engage my argument. And then I said something to the effect of, this is a lie. What is your evidence? And then he blocked me.
Yeah.
So it's what you see there is that when people, so there are two types of, I think, having the moral high ground. One is when you have a real confidence, and that's when you're willing to explain your views to people. And the other is where you have a certain societal status, where it's not really earned, but it's considered, you dominate the politically correct version. You have the political correctness at this point in time in society. And when people have that kind of pseudo-moral authority, they do all sorts of irrational things. So when somebody acts like they have the moral high ground, I think seeing if they're really a debater or whether they just want to dictate to you, or ignore you, that's a really good test. I think it's a good, one of the reasons why people really value this show is, you're not an unconfident guy, although you're interviewing people, but it's, there's a certain confidence in being willing to discuss things with anyone, and there's a certain, it's very revelatory when people are not willing to discuss things, and their number one talking point is, there's nothing to discuss.
Right, well, I always find it funny, it's that I've never in my life felt the need to be right all the time. And everyone I feel in the public space always wants to prove how right they are. So I'm completely fine having this conversation. And maybe I would look back now on my interview with Michael Mann and sort of look at through a bit of a lens of what you've just said there. And maybe if I have him on again, I would push him on some of those things. All right, well, that's the conversation I want to have, and that's why we did it. So you guys can get Alex's book. It's The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and check out industrialprogress.com. The link for the book is right down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll do it again next week.